Hello, and welcome to the Freight Flow Advisor Brief. Today, we're not just talking about AI in another buzzword. We're actually going to be talking about 3 factories, 3,000 jobs, and a tenfold jump in U.S. optical manufacturing capacity. All of this is anchored by NVIDIA and Corning. So if you run trucks, manage assets, deploy capital and logistics, or underwrite industrial real estate, this episode is about your next decade of freight, whether you touch a GPU or not. So let's talk about it. You've probably seen the headlines that NVIDIA and Corning announced a long-term partnership to dramatically expand the U.S. manufacturing of advanced optical connectivity for AI infrastructure. That's a lot of buzzwords, but if you strip it away, here's what it actually means in physical terms. Corning is planning to increase U.S. optical connectivity, manufacturing, and capacity by 10%. Let's take a listen.
NVIDIA renew factories entirely devoted to products for NVIDIA in North Carolina and Texas. And while Corning and NVIDIA didn't share many specifics, it's likely the deal is worth tens of billions of dollars. This could be the big deal many analysts have been waiting for, the debut of a new technology called co-packaged optics. It could eventually mean NVIDIA replaces the 5,000 copper cables 2 miles worth inside its rack scale systems like Vera Rubin with tiny glass fibers made by Corning, something that until now has never been accomplished at scale. Co-packaged optics would vastly reduce the energy needs of an AI data center because glass is far more energy efficient than copper. It also means lower latency for all those AI tasks because fiber optics can send data far faster than copper, allowing faster communication between the hundreds of thousands of GPUs in an AI data center that need to act as one to execute AI workloads.
So this move by Corning will boost U.S. fiber production by more than 50%. It will build 3 new advanced manufacturing facilities in North Carolina and Texas, and those plants are expected to create 3,000 new high-paying jobs. So that's not a software announcement. That's a multi-billion-dollar bet on assets, inbound materials, outbound product, and long-term freight corridors. NVIDIA's own framing is telling. In the press release and subsequent interviews, Huang calls AI the largest infrastructure build-out of our time and explicitly ties it to a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reinvigorate American manufacturing and supply chains. Now, when the CEO of a trillion-dollar chip company starts talking about supply chains and manufacturing jobs, rather than just model performance, that should be your cue as a logistics leader to stop and start modeling lanes. So let's take a second and talk about why NVIDIA cares so much about Corning. This isn't just about more bandwidth. It's truly about fundamentally changing the plumbing inside of AI data centers. Right now, NVIDIA's next generation rack scale systems rely on something like 5,000 copper cables per rack to move data between chips and servers. Copper works, but it's bulky, power hungry, and it doesn't scale gracefully when you're trying to build AI factories that are essentially the size of small towns. What Corning brings to the table is advanced optical fiber that can move data significantly faster than copper. And it can do it while using roughly 5 to 20 times less power. And that's according to reporting on deal and co-package optic plans. The term you'll start hearing more as time goes on is co-package optics. And essentially what this means is integrating optical interconnects directly with chips instead of treating them as long afterthought. NVIDIA's goal is to swap out those thousands of copper cables for glass fiber in the next waves of AI racks. So what does that mean for you in freight? Well, because when you change what goes into the rack, you change what moves into the plant. And then you commit in parallel to approximately $500 billion of AI infrastructure built in the United States over 4 years, including new supercomputer manufacturing facilities in Texas with Foxconn and Wistron. You're not just tweaking the bill of materials, you're redrawing where high-value industrial freight will flow at scale and for years. North Carolina, Texas, and the emerging AI freight spine is an interesting geography because that's where it gets real actionable. On the optical side, Corning is doubling down on North Carolina. Earlier this year, Meta agreed to pay Corning $6 billion through 2030 for fiber optic cable for its AI data centers anchored in Hickory, North Carolina. Corning was already expanding fiber capacity there. Now, You add NVIDIA to the mix. Three new advanced manufacturing facilities across North Carolina and Texas dedicated to optical technology for NVIDIA and expected to boost U.S. optical manufacturing by a factor of 10. On the compute and system side, NVIDIA has announced plans to produce up to $500 billion worth of AI in servers and infrastructure in the US over 4 years. That includes Blackwell chips fabricated in Arizona, plus supercomputer manufacturing plants in Texas within roughly 12 to 15 months. If you put it all together, you can see the emerging spine. Arizona has the high end chip fabrication, Texas has the supercomputer and server assembly. North Carolina and Texas have the optical connectivity and fiber, and hyperscale data center campuses sprinkled along the grid where power and water are available. For railroad, truck carriers, LTL players, and industrial developers, this is the blueprint for where future AI and the freight that surround it actually originates and terminates. When multiple AI adjacent manufacturers cluster in the same states, you get freight density, which means better backhaul options, more realistic, dedicated operations, and eventually enough scale to justify purpose. You also get built warehousing and transload infrastructure. That's not tomorrow's story because Corning has already said these investments are being made to meet the demand driven by ongoing AI factory buildouts. So let's take a quick break to talk about Freight Flow Advisor. This episode is brought to you by Freight Flow Advisor at freightfa.com, your one-stop shop for all things freight and freight intelligence. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, North Carolina plus Texas plus Arizona, I get the big picture. What I need to know is what does it actually cost me to run into these corridors with equipment I have today? And that's exactly what Freight Flow Advisor and Freight FA are solving for you. It was built to give you real live cost estimates. And our Freight Flow Advisor chat allows you to ask lane level questions conversationally. Things like, what should I be targeting from Dallas into Hickory on specialized flatbed? And you can get a grounded cost estimate in seconds. You can benchmark your pricing logic against dynamic cost intelligence instead of gut feel and last year's spreadsheet. And you can build internal guardrails so your team quotes aggressively without giving away the farm. You're already using chat interfaces all day. Freight Flow Advisor is the one that actually understands your freight math. If you want to be the carrier or 3PL that's ready when NVIDIA Corning freight starts moving in volume, give yourself a cost advantage before everyone else wakes up on these lanes. You can learn more and see it in action by visiting freightfa.com. That's freightfa.com. As we pivot back to NVIDIA and Corning, let's translate all of this into how it actually hits your P&L. First, inbound industrial freight. 3 new optical factories don't appear out of thin air. They need civil construction, structural steel, concrete, heavy equipment, specialized manufacturing machinery, clean room infrastructure, power systems, and so on. They also need inputs, silica-based materials, specialty glass, chemicals, spools, cable, packaging. This is a project freight and industrial inbound into North Carolina and Texas over multiple years, with very little tolerance for missed delivery windows once construction milestones are set. Second, outbound high-value product. Once those plants ramp, you're moving fiber cable and optical connectivity components into data center buildouts. Compared to commodity freight, this kind of cargo, it tends to demand better packaging and handling. It has much tighter appointment schedules, and it carries a higher cost of service failure. You might move fewer pounds per load, but the revenue per loaded mile and the relationship value can be meaningfully higher. Third, let's talk about corridor concentration. NVIDIA isn't the only one backing Corning. Revisiting Meta's deal, again, it's worth up to $6 billion in fiber optic purchases through 2030. Corning's broader optical business is already selling cable as fast as they can make it. For freight planners, that points to durability. This isn't a one-off CapEx cycle. It's an emerging multi-tenant ecosystem where multiple AI customers anchor demand for the same manufacturing footprint. When you zoom out on everything we're talking about and look at the compute side and the connectivity side, Both stacks are investing in overlapping geographies. Your freight risk profile starts to look less like single customer exposure and more like an anchored ecosystem. That's exactly the kind of pattern you want in freight and industrial investments. So, if you're a carrier or asset based 3PL, you need to ask yourself a question. Do we have a clear view of our exposure to North Carolina and Texas today? Are we set up to handle high value, high spec industrial freight? Or do we need to up our game on packaging, claims handling, and appointment performance? Listen, if you're a broker, which shippers are quietly sourcing inputs or components that feed into these AI infrastructure projects? You need to be asking questions like, do we know what it will actually cost us to cover a Hickory to Texas plant lane on short notice? And is our pricing engine calibrated for the level of volatility? Listen, the NVIDIA Corning partnership is one of the cleanest, earliest signals where the story touches U.S. soil: North Carolina, Texas, Arizona, and every corridor that connects them. The question for you is whether you treat this as a headline or start to look at a plan that works for you. Now, if you want to go deeper on freight and lane implications, we break this down in more detail with visuals in our latest article on Substack. And if you want help turning this into numbers lane by lane, you already know where to go: freightfa.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with a logistics expert or a thought leader or a supply chain leader in your network. And remember to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook at The Freight Flow Advisor. You can also listen to this podcast on your daily commute on Spotify and Apple. Just search The Freight FA Brief. Lastly, you can watch us on YouTube at The Freight FA Brief. So look, we're on every platform. Just make sure when you visit us, you hit that subscribe button. Until next time, this has been your Freight Flow Advisor Brief.